Hello, welcome. Maybe people will start trickling in gradually, but I'm just gonna get started. I see one person's here. That's awesome. Good evening, or whatever time of day it is where you are. So we're gonna start today on the tail of this pine warbler. Hopefully you've seen a little bit of my previous videos. So the first thing we're going to do is work on the upper tail covert. So that's this area right here. So I'm going to erase my graphite lines until I can barely see them, just as a guide, but we don't want that graphite to show up in our drawings. And today, just so you know, we're going to use a variety of different colors, but we're going to start out with some of your warm grays and yellows and a little bit of brown, okay? So for my base layer, I'm just going to put down, let's see, I'm thinking Naples yellow is a good one. So if you're using the Faber-Castell Polychromos, that's a good sort of shade of yellow to use. Kind of like a medium range yellow. And I'm just going to go in the direction of the feathers and just fill in this whole upper tail coverts area, that yellow area that you see above the tail. So these feathers are kind of almost like hair. They're very loose, but we're just putting down that base layer, so just getting the color in. I'm going to zoom this in a little bit too so you can see better. There we go. And then if you want to smooth it out so that you don't have, like white paper spots showing through, you can take a lighter color. For example, I would use something like cream and just go over the top of that yellow using a little bit more pressure, like medium pressure. Again, going in the direction of the feather growth. And as you can see, if you were here last class, I did fill in the rest of these wing feathers here. We were working on the wing last time. If you have any questions about that, feel free to put them in the comments. But basically I use, the same method for the rest of the wing feathers as we did last time. I am thinking we might have a chance to finish our pine warbler this evening. We will see. So next, I want to do a little bit of second layer here. So I would take, a very kind of warm gray to go over the top of that and add in a little bit of texture. So I'm going to go with kind of a darker warm gray. Let's see, what have I got here? A warm gray 5 would be a good one. So we're just going to add in some texture now. You can start, I kind of like to start at the bottom edge like this. And if you have your reference photo available, you can see the spots that are darker and lighter. There's this kind of area in the middle that has some fairly dark streaking in there. You can even come in with like a warm gray 6 for that area. But if you want to experiment with using a darker gray or any other color, it's good to always start with light pressure, see how that looks, and then if you want to go darker, you can after that. And I have this on my laptop. I'm just going to use my magnifier tool. And if I look, more closely at that area, I can kind of see that there are some browns in there too. There's this other really cool thing that I just found out about. I don't know how much I'll actually use it, but there is an app that you can use called Colored Pencil Picker. It's free, and you can actually upload a reference photo to the app and like hover over areas, and it will tell you, suggestions for what colors to use. And you can put in, whatever you have, whether it be Prismacolor or Polychromos or Caran d'Ache. It has a bunch of different brands on there. I thought it was kind of neat. When I tried it with this photo, it actually came up with a bunch of the colors we've been using, so that's nice. And I'm going to add a little bit of the olive green yellowish also. Where did that one go? here it is. Oh, hi, Uncle Rick. Thanks. Good to see you. So you can kind of like mix that greenish yellowish color in there too. And a good way to do that is if you go over the top of it with another lighter color, like the Naples yellow, and use a little more pressure. Kind of blend it together a little. And then once you blend over the top of things, if they get too blended, then you can come back in and add more texture too. So it's looking pretty good. Good, especially at the edge, to make sure you define that texture. Because now what we're going to do is the undertail coverts, which is this area right here. So that, you know, it's a white area, but it's not actually white because it's in shadow, especially because it's on the underside of the bird. So for that, I'm going to use kind of a light cold gray. Let's see, a cold gray. This one will be good. Cold gray 3. But first, you know, this is especially important because it's a light area. Try to really erase this graphite until you can barely see, so it's not showing through. And then you can also add this little bit of the tail feathers in there too. But you're just going to put a light textury sort of line here. And then we can start adding a little bit of that gray, using fairly light pressure. And it's going to be darker, you know, at the bottom edge, and then it gets lighter as you go up. And then to blend that, I would use something like an ivory. Or if you don't have that, you can just use a white pencil. But ivory is kind of like, it's like, how would you describe it? I guess a darker white, really. It's got a little bit of pigment in there. So it's like off-white, basically. So I'm using more medium pressure now, just to do a little bit of blending. And finally, you can come back in with that, I'd use actually a little bit of darker gray. Like you can use a cold gray 5, which is fairly dark, but just use light pressure with it to bring some more shadow in. Okay. A little more yellow here. I think we're ready now to start with the longer tail feathers, also known as the rectrices. So most birds, they have 6 tail feathers on either side. So these feathers that you're seeing here are stacked tail feathers. Again, I'll do one of my goofy little sticky note drawings just to show you what the tail looks like when it's spread out, so you have a sense of that. I think I counted right here. Okay. So, 12 in total. Yeah. And usually the middle two are like a little bit pointier on most birds. And then, you know, this textury area here is the upper tail coverts. So when you're looking at the tail on this bird, those feathers are stacked. And if you want, you can try to count, you know, how many you can see there. It looks like you can see about 8 stacked. So that's approximately half of the tail. You can see a little bit on the other side as well. So again, we can erase this graphite until we can barely see. And I'm going to bring in kind of a medium gray and just outline those tail feathers. So I'm going to use a warm gray 4 with fairly light pressure and just start outlining these stacked feathers. Starting with, you know, there's going to be the 2 that you can kind of see on the other side. And you don't have to be exact with how many there are, you know. I tend to get that way, you know, I count everything, I measure everything, but you don't have to be like that. That's kind of just my style. But it is good to approximately, you know, have it be accurate. You know, depending on angle, it's not always going to be the same, of course. But for the most part, we can see half of the bird's tail here. So I hope that's showing up. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's about right. And then, you know, you have these tail feathers coming up over the top of coverts like that. So now that we have those outlined, we can start shading them a little bit more. And to do that, you'll notice actually there's a little bit of brown at the tip of the tail. If you zoom in on your photo and you look really closely, there's like some brown markings here. But mostly it's just kind of gray. We have a little bit of yellow coming in towards the middle of those feathers. But mostly it's gray, so I'm going to take my cold gray 2 and just do a base layer. And try to go in the direction, so the direction of the barbs, which is basically going to be at an angle like this. Because what's happening here is the middle of the feather, for example, this top one here, is sort of towards the top line here, and then you have barbs coming off it going down like that. You can shade all that in, and then you can also smooth it out using the ivory. And you'll notice when you come towards this edge here, it's brighter. So use very, very light pressure when you come down here. What did I do? Oh, here it is. Again, when you're doing the smoothing, you can use stronger pressure. And then I'm going to start adding in a little bit of that brown at the end. So let's zoom that in. That's kind of like a reddish brown. So something like a burnt ochre would be good for that area. So like this color here. And you can just add a little hint of that at the tip of the tail. Maybe where some feather wear is happening. And then the shadows, the darkest shadows are pretty dark, so it's good to get those in. I'm gonna use, they're actually quite dark, so I'm actually gonna use black for those. I'm gonna make sure that my pencil is very sharp, because these are really thin lines we're working with here. It's almost gone. This is my black pencil. I have another one ready to go. And it's in my little extender here. So just be careful when you're adding the lines in. They're pretty thin lines. And you'll notice that the width of them also varies in places. So like this one here, it's a little bit of a thicker line at the top here. And there's also a little bit of a fork here to the tail, just barely. And that's where, the middle of the tail basically is. I want to make sure to show that. So if you need to, you can erase the tips of the tail a little bit there and go a slight fork. There we go. And a few of these lines, you've got a little bit of texture here too, just a very small amount. And this last one here, again, you've got kind of a thicker line in this area. And also, you can extend that with some shadows. One of your darker grays, like a cold gray 5, and extend that a little bit. Because it's not super dark, but it's like a dark gray there. So whenever you have a shadow like that, again, think about it being 3D. Like imagine, at least it helps with me to visualize things. Imagine that feather up there is overlapping this one, and you could almost like stick your pencil under that a little. For me, I'm a visual learner, so it really helps me to imagine things like that to help it sort of become 3D. Alright, that's not bad. A little more shadow here. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the lower part of the belly. I'm not sure if all of you have done quite this much of the belly, because I know, let me zoom out again. Out. That when we were doing classes, we kind of just went up to here. But I went ahead and continued because this is kind of similar. It's just without these stripy markings. But I wanted to hold off on this area because it is a different coloration. So if you haven't gotten this far, don't worry. It's really just a similar technique to up here, just without the markings. But if anybody has any questions about that, feel free to let me know or send me a message. But this area is more like a cream color. So that's what we're going to work on now. So I'm going to erase my graphite till I can barely see, including these feathers that come up over the top of the legs. So some of you may know, when you're looking at a bird leg, you're actually only seeing like the ankle area and the foot area of the leg. Again, I can do another one of my silly sticky note drawings to show you what I mean. So a bird leg, the knee is actually under the feathers. Sorry, it's above the tail. Ignore that part. But the knee is underneath those feathers. And then you're just seeing this area down here. The ankle and the foot and the toes here. Okay? So that's kind of just an interesting tidbit. So for my base layer here, I am going to use cream for most of it. But then when I get to like here and these feathers that come up over the legs, I'm actually going to use ivory instead because that's like a lighter color there. I'm just going to sharpen my pencil. And you'll see that if you have your reference photo out, you'll see that there's like kind of a little floof that comes down here. So we do want to make this textury. And I'm sorry if you can't see it very well at this point, but you zoom back in. You'll be able to see better, I think, once I add the darker layers in. But try to just see, this is how far down I'm coming with my pencil. It's like down to here. And then when you're adding in this base layer, going in the direction of the feathers, so it's really just, it's pretty easy, just like a sweeping motion. Oh, thank you. For some reason, I can't tell who wrote that comment, but Facebook's being weird. So I'm gonna basically stop right here. And now I'm gonna use the ivory, which is gonna be even harder to see, but. And I'll also use the ivory over the top of the cream to smooth that out a little. I still have some graphite in here. So we're going to take it out with this. It's the electric eraser. I learned a new thing about this, by the way, which I feel really silly that I didn't know this. Apparently it's supposed to come with a metal thing that you stick in here, and it extends the eraser out and holds it in place. But for some reason, mine did not come with that, I don't believe. So I've always just been using it and kind of turning it on to hold it in while it's, rotating in motion. But if you go like that while it's not turned on, it's just going to fall right out. So if you get one, try to get one that comes with one of those metal things to hold it in, because I'm sure that makes things easier. I might even see if I can get that piece. All right. So, it's good, you know, for this area to plot in the parts that are darker. Just for planning purposes. So, I'm going to take a warm gray 5 and just add in the shadow here that's underneath the wing, because we really want to add that depth to our drawing. And we're going to add even more shadows later to add more depth. But this is just the base layer. Good to make it kind of textury, of course. And then the other places that we have shadows are, you know, where this little puffy part comes out. There's a little shadow there. And also at the top of the legs here. And kind of at the back of this area too. And then, you know, when you get to this leg that's on the other side, it's in shadow there. More shadow because it's on the other side of the bird, and that's how the lighting works in this photo, you know. All right. So now I'm going to add in a little bit of darker areas underneath of that wing. So, always dropping pencils. I'm going to use a cold gray 6, which is pretty dark. So for this area here. And use pretty hard pressure right underneath that wing feather there. And you really want to have the contrast between the edge of that feather and the side of the bird. Again, think about, like, imagine it's 3D and you can kind of put your pencil up underneath the wing like that. That wouldn't be very nice. I don't think a pine warbler would like that very much. And then the shadow kind of comes up here and there's like this texture there. And if I want to soften that, you know, I can just bring in my regular eraser and soften the edge of it a little. So now I'm gonna use a slightly lighter gray, warm gray 5, and do, you know, kind of the lighter shadows that are kind of in between barbs, in between feather barbs like this. Just a little bit sharper. And you can start to sort of define this edge too. There is a shadow also right here. As well as the edge that's in this area. But you don't want to make it too dark, you know, because then your edge will sort of look artificial, which is always a tricky balance when you have a really light color, because you want to be able to see that there's an edge there, and the bird doesn't just dissolve into nothingness, into space, but you also don't want it to look like a hard line, you know. So if you start to go too dark, you can kind of just come over the top of it with the eraser. And just do light motions like that over. And it's especially tricky if you want to make prints of your drawings. I've found, you know, when it's got a light edge like that, oftentimes it really won't show up very well. If I was to make really high quality prints, you know, that would probably be better, like the Giggly prints, which I've thought about trying. But you know, at most print shops, it's gonna leave just kind of white there unless you have a bit of an edge that's darker. Alright, and I'm just going to bring a little bit more yellow down too. So I'm going to use, how about this yellow here? Kind of a medium yellow. It's a cadmium yellow. Just to have sort of a smooth transition from where there's the brighter yellow into that sort of cream color. A little more shadows here. All right, making good progress. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions in the comments. But otherwise, I think we're going to move on to the legs now. So we are going to need some different colors for these legs. So let me just give you some suggestions on what to use for those. I'm going to go with, we are going to want some sort of bright yellows again. So something like a cadmium yellow. Like this color yellow, basically. And then we can also add to it probably a little bit of burnt ochre. This one here. And something like terracotta, which is kind of an orangey brown. So that's going to be for the areas on the toe pads. And then when we get to, you know, the leg here, probably going to use some warm grays. And a little bit of brown as well, like a dark sepia. It's my dark sepia. That's a color that I use for a lot of different things. It's a really good one to have out all the time. That's weird. I might have missed. Oh, here it is. Dark sepia. So this is like a neutral brownish, dark grayish kind of color. I hope you can see that. A good equivalent in Prismacolor maybe would be like a dark umber, and then you could add a dark warm gray to it and kind of mix them together. But like we do with everything, we're going to do a base layer first. And I'm just going to start with that leg that's nearer to us. And you'll see it has some shiny spots. There's like a shiny, I should say shiny lines. Shiny line along the middle of the leg. Just sort of down the center. The side. So I'm going to put a fairly light base layer in there just to get some color down. I'm going to use a cold gray 2 for that. So, whoops, sorry. I'm going to erase this until I can barely see the graphite. But make sure you can still see it because you want to be able to see the outline of your foot still. And all the little shapes there. And then this is all smooth, so I'm just going to fill in that color. Except for the toe pads. So like this area here, let me erase this a little more. We want to leave that because that's going to be like the orangey area. And if you're looking at your photo, you'll be able to see what I mean. So that's something that you can bring in like the burnt ochre. Might even want a brighter orange. I think I'm going to have to grab them over here because I didn't have it out. So something like dark chrome yellow, which actually is almost like an orange. Even though it's called yellow, it's a very orangey yellow. That's a good one to bring in here too. Just to add a little brightness. There's quite a bit of orange in this area. And then, you know, so this is the back toe, known as the hallux. And then these other toes that come over the top here, you can really just see this one, and you can barely see part of another one here. But then the fourth one is kind of obscured from view because it's behind those toes. So just so you can understand the anatomy of a bird foot. A pine warbler has typical toe arrangement that, you know, the majority of birds have, which is anisodactyl toes. And that means has 3 toes in the front and 1 toe in the back. Okay, something like a woodpecker would have 2 in the front and 2 in the back that really helps them to grip the trees. It's like an X. That's known as zygodactyl. And there are some other kinds of toe arrangements too. Pamprodactyl is all 4 just going in the front like this. And that's, you know, things like swifts, so like chimney swifts, because they don't perch upright, they cling to the sides of cliffs and chimneys and things like that. Better be careful. If I start talking about bird facts, we're going to get too distracted. Okay. So add in that orange. Kind of like the treads on this guy, it's just the bottom edge. And if it looks super bright now, don't worry, because we will add some browns and things to kind of dull it down. And then, of course, we have the claw, which is on the hallux, this back toe here. For that, I'll use a little bit of a darker gray. So like a warm gray 5. And it's good with claws, you want it to come to a nice point at the end here and have a curvature that follows what you see in the photo. So it's similar to, you know, when you're drawing bills. This is an easy place for your brain to fill in information and accidentally draw the shape differently than it is, but try to draw just what you see. So now I'm going to start coming in with darker colors. So I'm going to use dark sepia for the leg. And have it nice and sharp so you can do, you know, fairly hard, but not like pressing into the paper, but a fairly good pressure here to outline the leg. A little bit lighter when you get to the toes because it's not quite as dark there. But if you have your reference photo, try to really look at the shape that you see there. And I've actually made a bit of a mistake here. I'm going to erase. So this part here, for the outline, this needs to bulge out more because this is, you know, when you're almost at the toes, it gets thicker here. And then you have this other toe. Alright, so we've got our basic outlines in there now. Let me make sure, try to put this a little more in the center of the screen. Make sure we're zoomed in here. So now we can add more dark sepia, but keep isolated sort of a stripe down the middle of the leg. So it looks nice and bright, because that's like the shiny area. And if you don't have an electric eraser, you should also keep isolated. If you look at your photo, you'll see some lines that come across here like that, which is the scaling on the leg. I'm going to come back in with my eraser and erase those in, but let me just show you. So basically like that. So that kind of thing, it is really nice to have an electric eraser or some kind of fairly strong eraser to put those in. But otherwise, I would try to mostly keep them isolated so they look bright. Like, don't put any pigment down is what I mean by that. You can kind of, if you're doing it that way, you can kind of outline them. And there's more lines down here that are closer together. Okay, I'm going to zoom in my photo a bit. So now we have a lot of yellow and sort of orange going on here. So I'm going to Take my dark chrome yellow, bring that up a little more. And then for the more shadowy parts, you can come in with burnt ochre and also sort of tone down a little bit of that orangey area. And remember to maintain the shape. You've got this sort of toe pad here, and then you've got this other part that comes down here. And then right here, have this sort of U-shaped area. The shape of a bird's foot is interesting to look at. You know, they want to be able to easily grip their perches. So that's why they have all those little U-shapes that come down like that. And you know, here on this toe, you've got some of them a little closer together, some of those wrinkles. And now we can use an even darker color for some of the shadows. I'm going to use terracotta. No, yeah, I think terracotta will be a good one to use. And finally, you can use another color I really like is the Caput Mortem, which is almost like a purpley, browny, orange kind of color. It's really cool. That's a good one for these kinds of shadows. It's interesting, you know, I never realized how much yellow was on a pine warbler foot. That's a really cool thing about drawing birds, you know, it can help you to get to know them and what they look like a lot better. And their mannerisms and all kinds of really cool things. You'll also notice it doesn't really show up very well in the photo, even zoomed in, but there are some very tiny little circles going on here. So let me just show you, because we can add these in even though you can't see them that well. So we have, just on the lower edge of the foot, very crude drawing, but you have these little circles, and they're not as big as I show you there, but I'm going to show you the more accurate size. But that helps the bird to grip its perch better. So we'll use Caput Mortem, very, very sharp. Burnt sienna will also work well if you only have that one. Something like it, you know, this kind of color. And we'll just add in those little circles. Don't have to do them super dark, just kind of a hint of them. And if you want to smooth out some of your shadows, you can use slightly lighter color like a burnt ochre to help you out with that. And then when you get to the top of the toes here, we have some more of that scaling going on. Another method is, it is kind of like an orangish color, so you can just come in like that and add those lines in and come around them a bit with your darker color, so your dark sepia. or any dark brown that you may be using. And so usually on bird toes, they have more of those lines towards the end of the toe. But then when you get up here, they have kind of a long scale here. And then maybe a couple more, which this guy has. And then you've got a similar kind of thing going on here with this toe. Although it's a little bit lighter in places. So there are some highlights going on here. And you can, if you have an electric eraser, use that to help with the highlights. Which if you accidentally erase too much, you just come back in with the pencil and kind of fix it up. Alright. And then of course we got this back claw on the hallux. Back toe here. So we can make that fairly dark. But with, again, kind of like this, you've got this line down the middle. That's a highlighty bit. And then it's sharp at the end. Alright. We have one more leg left to go, which is pretty similar, but I do want to just show you, it's a little bit different. Oh. I keep noticing things that need to be added. A little more shadow here. So this leg here is going to be, of course, darker than this one. Because you have the light coming from the front, maybe a little bit more on this side of the bird. So since this leg's on the other side, it's good to have it be in shadow. So this side towards you stands out. I'm going to erase my graphite till I can barely see it. And it's really going to be a pretty much similar method. We're just going to use a little bit of darker coloration while we're drawing this side. So I'm going to use for my base layer Warm Gray 5. But with kind of light pressure. And I'm also going to leave that line down the middle. And remember again, if you don't have an electric eraser, you can use a regular one and it will kind of get those in. Or you can just try to isolate them out. Meaning don't draw anything there. And then I've got a lot of orange going on here. So I'm going to bring that dark chrome yellow here. Which, like I said, it looks to me more like a light orange than a yellow. And then that back claw is fairly dark, so I can just come in with the dark sepia, but using light pressure for that part. There we go. And this toe, you'll notice the shape of it's a little different. I guess just because maybe the bird has like flexed its toe in a different way. But this pad is kind of more elongated. Just adding some of these bottom shadows here. Okay. So now I'm going to use the dark sepia. Bring in some of these outlines. Try to have it be pretty sharp when you're doing this part. Oh, and I also should have mentioned, you know, when you get to the top here, try to get some of that texture in there, where the feathers come over. All right. Shape the toe there. Bird feet are hard. I think they're one of the harder parts of drawing birds. But I really like this photo because the feet are very clear. You can see them pretty well. So again, I'm going to try and just add a little suggestion of those tiny circles here along the, what I would call like the tread part of the toe pads. And that's one of those things that even though you can't really see it in the photo, if you know it's there, you can still put it in. It's kind of like lots of times when I draw dog portraits of people, their noses are not super clear, but you know that dogs' noses have all these little tiny circles and texture all over them. So sometimes I'll pull up another photo where the nose is zoomed in really clearly and use that to help me out. I actually got like some of this caput mortuum sort of in here too. And then, remember, this part comes out, right? There we go. And on this one, you can sort of see like these lines coming down here, and then you have the lighter ones in between. There is sort of a highlight at the top here. That's a difficult thing to show, but if you have this dark sepia line here, and then you have this light line over the top of it, that can help to show it a bit. And another thing, this is very subtle, but I'll come back in on this part. Sometimes, you know, you can sort of see in between where these scales are, that this one comes out and bulges out, and then you have this part that comes around. And you do want it to be with the shape of the leg when you do this line, so have it kind of curved. And then you come down here and it comes out and around, and it's like a scale coming over the top of here, so you know that part will bulge out, and it will there too. So it's good to try and get that shape in. A little more shadow to that claw. Don't be afraid to add in shadows where you really see them, because that can be a tricky thing with colored pencil, being afraid to add in shadows. And you know, that's a thing that happens to me, and it happens to a lot of people, but you really do want to get that contrast. And then again, if you want to smooth it out a little, you can go over the top with a lighter color. Even something like the cream, just to smooth it. And then if you need to come back in with orange, you can. All right. Not bad. And then, you know, we want to show that this leg is darker than this one here. So it's good to come in with a warm gray. Like a warm gray 5. And that highlight line, it is a highlight, but we're going to shade it in to show that it's not as bright as this one here. Also add in a little more dark sepia. And if you want to really, you know, show that this is darker, you can add something like a dark indigo. Just to add some depth to it and make it darker. If you do that, I would go over the top of it again with the dark sepia so it doesn't look too blue. And then, right, I was going to add these in. And you know, when you're defining them, like I talked about, this is a very small thing to be able to see, but I hope you can see it. Try to add some curvature. Oops. Cool. All right, looking pretty good. Maybe just add a few more dark areas here. Our bird is just about finished. And if you do want to add in, I'm going to erase this graphite here where he's sitting. You can shade in a little bit of gray where he's sitting, I should say standing, perched. So that's a pretty cold gray there. Obviously, you don't have to get the color perfect, but put in some cold gray here. And this, I happen to know, was taken on Hawk platform. So this is wood here, it's kind of grayish. And I'm just going to go with the grain of the wood like this. And of course, there is going to be left behind some white in between your lines. So, I'm going to take a warm gray 2. Use some more pressure and smooth it out. And it's nice to mix the warm grays and the cold grays sometimes like this, but the warm gray 2 is just a really good one for smoothing it out. Which is a tip I picked up from Bonnie Snowden, who has really nice tutorial videos. BONNYSNOWDON. She does a lot of pet portraits. Would definitely encourage you to check her out, her videos. And then I'm going to also add warm gray 6 to these shadowy areas. So there's just kind of like a line here. And it's like wood grain, right? So also put in like a cold gray 5. Good to use a little bit, some warm grays and some cold grays. And just put some lines in there like that. And it is, you know, the actual picture is lighter than what I did here, but that's not really a huge deal, at least in my book. Okay. So let's zoom out the whole thing. There we go. There's our pine warbler. So I'll just ask, does anyone have any questions about either this session or any of the other ones that we did? And if you think of something later on, please do feel free to send me a message. Or you can comment on this video. I will also see that. I hope you all have enjoyed this. It's really been a lot of fun teaching these. And also, I'd love to see any of your drawings. If you want to send them to me, that would be really awesome. And if you want any suggestions or tips on your drawings, feel free to ask me. I've had so much fun doing this. I'm thinking that I probably will do another series soon. So stay tuned on my art page. I'm going to take a look at a survey that I put out and see what people were thinking as far as another thing that you'd like to do. So it might end up being, you know, a raptor, something like that. We'll see. All right. Thank you very much for joining this evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and weekend. Bye.